The birth of the dream. The origin of Martin Luther King Jr.'s legendary "I Have a Dream" speech. A hot summer sun can bake the attention out of even the most engrossed crowd. Add a full day of songs and speeches, and you've got the makings of a late afternoon stupor. And on that August 28th day back in 1963, the sun was in high gear. It had not only driven streams of perspiration down the faces of the Washington, D.C. gathering, but had driven many to the shade trees and others to the reflecting pool to cool their burning feet. No, after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, following an 87-degree high humidity day, was not exactly the prime time to stir the souls of the onlookers. That, however, is what the smartly dressed speaker desperately hoped he could do. After all, he had worked on the final version of his speech until 4 in the morning, and between meetings with fellow speakers and civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King Jr. continued to cross out and substitute words on the prepared text, striving to polish it to near perfection. Finally, the time was near. His close friend, gospel singer Mahalia Jackson, had imbued the protesters with her inimitable spirit as she belted out, "I've been buked and I've been scorned," and followed it up with a soulful rendition of "How I Got Over." Then Rabbi Joachim Prince from the American Jewish Congress spoke briefly about his time as a rabbi in Berlin under Hitler. Like the majority of German people, he asserted, America had become a nation of silent onlookers when it came to racial injustice. Finally, the sweltering crowd saw Martin Luther King Jr. working his way through the notables on stage to take his place behind the podium. As he read the prepared script, he clearly emphasized each point. He was, in fact, a finely tuned speaking machine, and had done nothing wrong. Unfortunately, as both he and the assemblage realized, he also hadn't done anything exceptionally right. He knew in his heart that although he had connected with the minds of the onlookers, he hadn't yet hooked their hearts. Nearing the end, he encouraged the participants to go back to their states and spread the message of racial equality. Then, as he paused a second, a voice rang out from the crowd below. "Tell 'em about the dream, Martin." Still following his script, he continued, "Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed." Then, as suddenly as before, the voice arose again. "Tell 'em about the dream." Obviously aware that shouting up to a nationally known speaker wasn't exactly proper etiquette, the owner of that voice, Mahalia Jackson, hoped her friendship with Dr. King would allow her to take the liberty. Throughout the trying times of his life, he had often called her on the phone, saying, "Mahalia, I'm having a rough day. Sing for me." As she provided him with a private concert, tears often rolled down his face. Although he continued with his planned speech, he instantly recognized her voice and knew exactly what she was referring to. Several times during the previous months, Mahalia had witnessed King's sermons stirring the crowds when he talked about the dream he had for the country of blacks and whites living together in harmony. Like Martin, Mahalia had realized that his speech had not yet reached the emotional intensity he was capable of producing. Still, though, he stuck to the comfort of his original message. "Let us not wallow in the valley of despair," King continued. "I say to you today, my friends," but then it happened. During an unusually long pause, his whole demeanor transformed. Laying the script down, he grabbed the podium and leaned forward. As he did, one of his longtime advisors and friends, Clarence Jones, whispered to someone standing beside him on stage, "These people don't know it, but they're about to go to church." And so, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, he crooned in his newly enhanced preacher voice, I still have a dream. It's a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. As he continued, a new intensity molded his features. He no longer found his words on a paper, but seemed to be picking them out of the air. He was, in fact, selecting them from a mental life script that reached back through previous speeches as well as personal experiences and beliefs that had shaped his exceptional life. As he stood before about 250,000 onlookers and millions more watching him on television, he'd cast off the safety wires and ventured out on the tightrope without a net. He was winging it. As he did, all 3 major television networks sent his live image and voice across the airwaves to millions who had never heard him speak. One of those was President John Kennedy. As King's soaring rhetoric poured out of a television in the White House, Kennedy was riveted to the screen. He's damn good, he commented, damn good. Like Kennedy, viewers across the nation, black and white, recognized a quality in Dr. King that somehow reached across racial and social divides. He acknowledged the historic mistreatment of blacks, but didn't incite the crowd with inflammatory oratory. America has given the Negro people a bad check, he declared, then added, we've come to cash that check. I have a dream, he affirmed, that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. As the viewers on the National Mall and in front of their televisions took in his powerfully delivered words, many felt he was indeed speaking to and for them. Suddenly, the exhaustion from the blazing sun and the long stream of speeches lifted as a sea of faces focused on their new passionate spokesman. I've never seen him speak the way I saw him on that day, Clarence Jones would recall. It was as if some cosmic transcendental force came down and occupied his body. As King ended his impromptu verbal journey with the words of an old gospel song, free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last, it was clear that the civil rights movement had a new voice. Dr. King had the power and ability, and the capability, U.S. Representative John Lewis would later summarize, to transform those steps on the Lincoln Memorial into a monumental area that will forever be recognized. The exhausted but energized participants would take more home with them than snapshots and souvenirs of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. They also carried back to Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, and the slums and ghettos of our northern cities a cherished memory. That memory far overshadowed the traffic problems of getting to the demonstration, as well as the blazing sun that beat them down once they were there. For the rest of their lives they could tell envious children and wide-eyed grandchildren that they were there when the dream was born. Its birth, as Clarence Jones once put it, was prompted by one of the world's greatest gospel singers shouting out to one of the world's greatest Baptist ministers.